Hi. The book I'm going to review today is called A Philosophical Inquiry into the Sublime and Beautiful, written by Edmund Burke. Now the copy I have here is it's published by Oxford World's Classics. Now, if you read a lot, you know that most of the time when books that are republished this is from the 1700s, they include an introduction to the book. And in the past, when I was first started reading, I always felt that I had to read the introduction before I read the book. I don't know how that got in my head, but it did. And many times I would start a book and start reading the introduction, and I would just quit right on the introduction because I lost interest in the book. So finally, I thought that I should just skip the introduction and just go right to the book. That's what I did with this book. For me, introductions were an obstacle to reading a book. And by eliminating that obstacle, I can just go right to the book, and it should stand on its own if it's going to be considered a classic. And I want to go through some of the reasons why I was dissatisfied with introductions. Typically, the author of the introduction is a very learned person, and they have an authoritative voice. They introduce all these things. They talk about the author's life. They talk about all these other things going on. They talk about other books. They talk about, let's stop there. So they talk about all those things. So I haven't even read the book. I don't even know what it's about. And they're adding all these things into the book. You know, they're putting like 50 things in my backpack to carry while I'm on this hike. You know, it's ridiculous. That's one of the reasons why I don't like introductions, because they make it more complicated. These introductions, they add too much to the book. They make it more difficult. That's a big problem. Another reason is these authors of the introductions, they have an authoritative voice, and they have their opinions, and they tell you what the book's about. They'll tell you what they think are the highlights of the book. Well, I'm a very impressionable person, and if someone tells me what a book is about, I find that often I will absorb what they told me, and I will think the way that they told me, because it's safe. Like, oh boy, this authoritative author said the book is about this, so I'll go along with them, and then I'll know I'll be correct. Rather than trusting my own instincts, reading the book, and thinking for myself, what are the qualities of the book that are relevant to me? Because that's what's important. And many times in the past, when I was younger, I would let this authoritative voice supersede my own. So that's enough on the introduction. So Edmund Burke was a lawyer, and he's obviously very interested in arts, poetry, literature, plays. So his basic premise seems to be that he wants to take these ephemeral things that he feels when he looks at art, and he wants to define them. He wants to get it on paper. What's happening here? He has this desire to define things and put them in categories. So to me, that's the basics of what he's doing. That's a very, very tough thing to do, to break down art and put it in categories and try to define it. So he's challenged himself to do a very difficult thing. Because it's so challenging, it's a frustrating read, because he brings up these topics. Let me bring up a couple of them to you. Sublime, sympathy, ambition, terror, obscurity, infinity, magnificence, suddenness, pain, beauty, recapitulation, smoothness, delicacy, ugliness, grace, taste and smell, the beauty and feeling, the beautiful sounds, effects of blackness, how pain can be the cause of delight. He's very good at describing his feelings, and about 50% of the time I agree with his feelings and how he defines words, but the other 50% of the time I disagree, or I would modify what he wrote, or I would, say on the contrary, or but what about this? And sometimes he'll bring up a topic like one of the ones I mentioned, and he'll start discussing it, and then he has no conclusion. He just kind of abandons the definition. And also he adds many examples from poetry and other books, and sometimes they don't really prove what he's saying. They just make it more complicated. It's good he named it an inquiry, because it's not definitive. He just starts discussing things. It's just a discussion of the sublime and the beautiful. So there are a couple of things that I liked. Some of his conclusions were, he says, infinity is the source of the sublime. So whenever you encounter something sublime, it makes you think of infinity. Sublime objects are vast, rugged, and negligent. Beautiful objects are small, smooth, and polished. Beauty should be light and delicate. Sublime should be solid and massive. Sublime causes astonishment. Beauty causes love. So that's just a basic review of the book. And as an experiment, I decided that I am going to read the introduction. I'm going to return to this video and share my thoughts on the introduction. Okay, I have returned, and I have overridden my rule of not reading introductions, and I read the introduction to this book, and my conclusion is I was right to not read introductions. The reasons are, as I stated before, twofold. Number one, the author who writes the introduction is an expert on the subject. He's probably read this book at least 3 times, maybe 5 or more times. He's an expert. He brings in all this material. It just confuses things. He talks about all the predecessors to Edmund Burke. He talks about all of these theories on aesthetics. Then he talks about make 5 or 6 other books that relate to Edmund Burke's books, and how they relate and how they don't relate. So he adds complexity to the work. I'm new to the work. I've never read the work. I just need to get the basics of Edmund Burke's thesis. That's all I need to do. But the introduction adds a bunch of other stuff before I've even got the basics down. It's very confusing. The second reason is that the author of the introduction shares his ideas of what the books are about, what the highlights of the books are about. I don't want to have his impressions of the book. I want to have my own impressions of the book. So because he's an authoritative voice, his ideas have an effect on me. And so I allow his ideas to supersede my own. But that's wrong. I should have my own ideas on this. I shouldn't take his ideas. So those are 2 reasons. In my opinion, this introduction should be printed after Burke's texts. Put it afterwards. Read Burke's text. If you like it, read the introduction and you add all this other stuff onto it. Historical perspective, all the books related to it, all the ideas it compares. At the end of the introduction, he adds the effect of Burke's writing on writers after Burke. And he does like 3 pages on that. So I'm going to keep my policy is I do not read introductions. And I'm going to keep my policy. I'm never going to read any more introductions. I don't like them at all. So that wraps up the review of this book. Thanks for watching.